Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Aurora's Dream, watching the stars drift past through the viewport. The cargo ship had been his home for 12 years. Ever since humanity joined the Galactic Union and started trading with alien species across the galaxy. Today, they carried medical supplies to the human colony on Kepler 442b, a routine run that Jake had made dozens of times before. "We're coming up on the Kepler system now, Captain," said Lisa Carter from the pilot's seat. She was young, maybe 25, with steady hands and sharp eyes that made her one of the best pilots in the merchant fleet. "Should be seeing the colony's beacon any minute now." Jake nodded and walked over to the communications station where Amy Walsh was monitoring the radio channels. Amy had been with the crew for 3 years, and her ability to speak 7 different alien languages made her invaluable for trade negotiations. She was frowning at her screen, which usually meant trouble. "Something wrong, Amy?" Jake asked. "I'm not picking up the colony's beacon," she said, adjusting the controls. "Actually, I'm not picking up anything from Kepler 442b at all. No radio traffic, no automated signals, nothing." Danny Rodriguez looked up from his engineering station. Danny was a short, stocky man who could fix anything that broke on the ship, and right now his face showed the same concern that Jake was feeling. "Could be equipment failure on their end," Danny suggested. "These outer rim colonies don't always have the best maintenance." Jake wasn't convinced. New Haven Colony had been established for 8 years and had a population of 50,000 humans. They had regular communication schedules with Earth and never missed a check-in. The silence was wrong. "Take us in closer, Lisa," Jake ordered. "But keep the engines warm. Something doesn't feel right about this." As Aurora's Dream approached the planet, Jake could see the colony's lights in the night side. At least the settlement was still there. But as they got closer, Lisa's hands tightened on the controls. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures." "In orbit," she reported. 3 large vessels, configuration unknown. "They're not showing up on any of our databases." Jake felt ice in his stomach. Unknown ships near a human colony could only mean one thing. "Amy, try to raise the colony on emergency frequencies. Danny, get our weapon systems online." "Our weapons?" Danny looked confused. "Captain, we're a merchant vessel. We've got some light defensive systems, but nothing that could take on military ships." "I know what we are," Jake said grimly. "But if those ships are hostile, we might be the only warning Earth gets." Amy's voice cut through the tension. "Captain, I'm getting something. It's weak, but it's definitely a human signal." She worked frantically at her console, trying to clean up the transmission. "I think it's coming from the surface." The message came through broken and full of static, but Jake could make out the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "This is New Haven Colony calling any human vessel. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Unknown alien forces have invaded the settlement. They are killing civilians. Please send help. Please send." The transmission cut to static. Jake stared at the communications panel, his mind racing. 50,000 people. Men, women, children. All of them defenseless against whoever was attacking them. "Lisa, how long to get back to the nearest military base?" 18 hours if we push the engines to maximum," she replied. "Too long. By the time they got help, it would be over." Jake made a decision that would change everything. "We're not leaving." "Captain?" Danny looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "What can we do?" "We're 1 cargo ship against 3 military vessels." "We can watch," Jake said quietly. "We can record what happens, and we can make sure Earth knows who did this." Over the next 6 hours, Jake and his crew witnessed hell. The alien ships belonged to the Vorthan Empire, a species known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty and military might. The Vorthans had conquered dozens of worlds, enslaving or destroying any species that opposed them. Now they had come for humanity. The aliens didn't just attack the colony. They systematically destroyed every building, every vehicle, every sign of human presence. When survivors tried to surrender, the Vorthan shot them down. When civilians tried to flee, the aliens hunted them through the streets. Jake watched through the ship's sensors as children were separated from their parents. Loaded onto transport ships like cargo. Amy managed to intercept some of the Vorthan communications. The aliens were speaking in their harsh, clicking language, but Amy's translation software picked up enough to understand their purpose. This wasn't war. This was extermination. The Vorthans were making an example of New Haven Colony to force humanity into submission. They want us to see this, Jake realized. They want us to go back to Earth and tell everyone what happened here. By the time it was over, New Haven Colony was gone. 50,000 humans were dead or enslaved. The Vorthans had left nothing but ruins and ash. Jake ordered Lisa to record everything, every image, every piece of evidence. Earth would need to know exactly what had happened here. As Aurora's dream prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake looked one last time at the dead world. Below, the Vorthans had made their point. They thought they had shown humanity its place in the galaxy. They thought they had proven that humans were weak and defenseless. They were wrong. Jake Morrison had been in space long enough to know something about humans that the aliens didn't understand. When humans were pushed too far, when they had nothing left to lose, they became something else entirely. Something dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The emergency session of the United Earth Government convened 18 hours after Aurora's dream arrived at military headquarters with their terrible news. President Maria Santos sat at the head of the massive conference table, her face pale, as she watched the recordings from New Haven Colony for the third time. Around her, the most powerful leaders of humanity struggled to process what they were seeing. 50,000 dead, whispered Defense Secretary Carl Williams, murdered in cold blood. And for what? To send us a message? Admiral Robert Hayes, commander of Earth's small defensive fleet, stood at the front of the room beside a holographic display showing the destroyed colony. He was a tall man with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen too much combat in his 40-year career. The Vorthans want us to surrender, he said simply. They think this demonstration will break our will to fight. General Frank Miller, head of Earth's ground forces, slammed his fist on the table. We have to respond. We can't let them massacre our people and do nothing about it? With what? Admiral Hayes asked. Frank, we have 12 battleships, 30 cruisers, and maybe 200 smaller vessels. The Vorthans have conquered half the galaxy. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. President Santos looked around the room at the faces of her advisors. Some showed anger, others fear, but all of them showed the same desperate realization that humanity stood alone. What about the Galactic Union? Surely they won't allow this kind of slaughter. Foreign Minister Janet Brooks shook her head. I've already contacted the Union Council. They say this is an internal matter between humanity and the Vorthans. They refuse to intervene. Internal matter? General Miller's voice rose in anger. 50,000 civilians are dead and they call it internal? The elder species see us as children, Admiral Hayes explained. They think we need to learn our place in the galaxy. They won't help us. President Santos stood up and walked to the window overlooking the capital city. Below, millions of humans went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire species faced extinction. Show me the Vorthan message again, she said quietly. The holographic display changed to show the recorded transmission from War Marshal Kethver, the Vorthan commander who had overseen the destruction of New Haven Colony. The alien was massive, covered in dark scales with 4 arms and cold yellow eyes. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. Humans of Earth, the War Marshal said, you have seen what happens to those who defy the Vorthan Empire. Your colony was weak and pathetic, just like your species. You have 30 days to surrender completely. Submit to Vorthan rule, or every human world will suffer the same fate as New Haven. Choose wisely. The recording ended, leaving the room. In silence, President Santos turned back to her advisors. What are our options? We can fight, Admiral Hayes said. We'll lose, but we can make them pay for every world they take. We can negotiate, suggested Foreign Minister Brooks. Maybe we can find some middle ground. We can evacuate, added General Miller. Send colony ships to unexplored regions, try to preserve some of humanity. President Santos considered each option. Fighting meant certain death for billions of people. Negotiating might save some lives, but it would mean slavery for the entire human race. Evacuation would preserve humanity, but it would mean abandoning Earth and admitting defeat. There's a fourth option, she said finally. We can show them what humans really are. The room fell silent. Admiral Hayes frowned. I'm not sure I understand, Madam President. The Vorthans think they understand us, President Santos explained. They think we're just another weak species that will roll over when threatened. They don't know what humans are capable of when we're pushed too far. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, the youngest officer in the room, spoke up. The Vorthans have never faced an enemy like us. They conquer through fear and overwhelming force. But they've never fought a species that refuses to stay beaten, President Santos nodded. Exactly. They want to know what humans will choose. I'll tell them. She walked to the communications console and activated the galaxy-wide broadcast system. Every inhabited world in known space would receive this message. Every alien species would hear humanity's answer. This is President Maria Santos of the United Earth Government, she began. 3 days ago, the Vorthan Empire murdered 50,000 human civilians on New Haven Colony. They did this to frighten us into submission. They wanted to show us that resistance is futile. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. They were wrong. We are not a species that kneels before tyrants. We are not a people who surrender to bullies. We are humans, and we have never backed down from a fight in our entire history. The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds. Alien beings stopped what they were doing to listen to the words of this small species they had dismissed as insignificant. War Marshal Kethfer wants an answer, President Santos said. Here is our answer. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We choose war. The words sent shockwaves through the Galactic Union. In the 1,000 years since the Union was formed, no species had ever declared war on the Vorthans. The aliens were too powerful, too ruthless, too successful. It was suicide. We know we are outnumbered, the President continued. We know the odds are against us. But the Vorthans have made one critical mistake. They think they can break the human spirit. They think they can make us afraid. Her voice became cold as ice. They're about to learn that there is nothing more dangerous in this galaxy than a human being with nothing left to lose. The broadcast ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. On Earth, President Santos turned to her advisors. Gentlemen, we have a war to prepare for. Admiral Hayes saluted. Where do we start, Madam President? We start by showing the galaxy what humans do best, she replied. We start by proving that sometimes the impossible is just another word for Tuesday. The transformation of humanity began within hours of President Santos' declaration. Across Earth and every human colony, the impossible became routine as an entire species prepared for war. Joe Mitchell had been making farm equipment at his factory in Detroit for 15 years, but now he stood watching as military engineers converted his production line to build weapon systems. The change took only 6 hours. Never seen anything like it, Joe told his supervisor, Ben Parker, as they watched robotic arms that once assembled tractors now welding armor plating onto military vehicles. It's like the whole world just shifted. Into war mode, Ben nodded, his weathered face serious. My grandfather told me stories about World War II, how America converted from making cars to making tanks overnight. But this is different. This is the whole human race. Dr. Helen Brooks worked without sleep in her laboratory beneath the Pentagon, surrounded by the brightest minds humanity could gather. She was a small woman with quick hands and an even quicker mind, and right now she was solving problems that alien scientists said were impossible. Her team had been given a simple mission: turn human technology into weapons that could kill Vorthans. The aliens think our technology is primitive, she explained to her assistant, Dr. Carol Davis. They see our chemical rockets and nuclear power and they laugh. They don't understand that primitive doesn't mean weak. Carol looked up from her computer screen, her eyes red from staring at equations for 12 straight hours. "What do you mean? Vorthan technology is elegant," Helen explained. "It's clean, efficient, and follows their rigid way of thinking. But human technology is messy, unpredictable, and built to work even when everything goes wrong. That's our advantage." The breakthrough came when Helen realized that human weapons didn't need to be better than Vorthan weapons. They just needed to be different. While aliens built shields to stop energy weapons, humans could use kinetic projectiles that punched through barriers like paper. While aliens expected orderly battle formations, humans could fight in chaos that would confuse and terrify their enemies. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner stood in the war room at military headquarters, staring at tactical displays that showed the impossible task ahead. At 28, he was the youngest officer ever promoted to strategic planning, but his unconventional thinking was exactly what humanity needed. Around him, senior officers argued about traditional military doctrine while Alex worked on something entirely different. "We can't fight them ship to ship," he said to Colonel Sam Wright, who was studying fleet deployment options. "They have 1,000 ships for every one of ours. We need to change the rules of engagement. Change them how?" Colonel Wright asked. "By not fighting fair," Alex replied. "The Vorthans expect us to meet them in open space combat. They want clean war with clear battle lines. We give them the opposite." Alex's plan was simple and terrifying. Human ships would avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. Instead, they would strike at supply lines, communication networks, and isolated targets. They would use hit-and-run tactics, ambush attacks, and psychological warfare to make the Vorthans afraid of empty space. Most importantly, they would make every battle cost the enemy more than it was worth. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the shipyard where Aurora's Dream was being converted from a merchant vessel to a warship. The process was brutal and efficient, stripping away everything that made the ship comfortable and replacing it with weapons, armor, and systems designed for one purpose: killing enemies. "She won't be pretty anymore," said Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez as he watched workers install missile launchers where the cargo hold used to be. "But she be deadly." Lisa Carter ran her hands along the new pilot controls, feeling the difference in the ship's responses. The peaceful merchant vessel was gone, replaced by something that could dance through enemy fire and strike back with lethal precision. "How many ships are we converting?" "Every merchant vessel, every transport, every ship that can mount a weapon," Jake replied. "The Navy wants 2,000 combat vessels ready in 3 weeks. 2,000 ships against their hundreds of thousands," Lisa said quietly. "The math doesn't work." "The math never works for humans," Jake said with a grim smile. "That's why we keep winning impossible wars." Meanwhile, intelligence officer Maya Chun worked in the shadows, using every trick humanity had learned about electronic warfare. She had spent years studying alien communication systems, and now she was using that knowledge to penetrate Vorthan networks. What she found there made her blood run cold. The Vorthans weren't just planning to conquer humanity. They were planning to erase every trace of human civilization. They saw humans as a dangerous anomaly that needed to be eliminated completely. There would be no prisoners, no negotiations, no second chances. "They're not just fighting a war," Maya reported to Admiral Hayes. "They're planning genocide." Admiral Hayes received the report in his office, where he was reviewing the deployment of Earth's defensive fleet. The old warrior had fought in 3 major conflicts during his career, but nothing had prepared him for this. "How long until they arrive?" 3 weeks, Maya replied. "Maybe less if they push their engines hard. 3 weeks to prepare for the end of everything. 3 weeks to turn a peaceful species into a war machine capable of fighting the galaxy's most feared empire. 3 weeks to prove that humans were more than just another conquered race." Admiral Hayes stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the blue sky of Earth. Somewhere out there, an alien fleet was coming to destroy everything he had ever loved. But they would find something waiting for them that they had never encountered before, a species that fought not just for victory, but for the right to exist. "Maya, send a message to all fleet commanders," he said. "Tell them that humanity has 3 weeks to remember what we really are. 3 weeks to show the galaxy that humans don't just fight wars, we win them. The first battle of the Human-Vorthan War began at Titan Station, humanity's outermost military outpost in the Sol system. Commander Steve Parker stood on the bridge of his flagship, the converted cruiser Iron Will, watching as 60 Vorthan warships emerged from hyperspace. His small fleet of 12 human vessels looked pathetic compared to the massive alien armada. But Steve had learned something important during his 20 years in the military. Size didn't always matter. All ships, this is Commander Parker. He spoke into his communication system. Remember what we practiced? Hit them fast, hit them hard, and make every shot count. Today we show these aliens what humans do when they're cornered. The Vorthan fleet moved in perfect formation, their ships arranged in precise geometric patterns that looked beautiful and deadly. War Commander Vashtar led the alien force from his massive battleship, confident that this would be an easy victory. The Vorthans had destroyed hundreds of species over the centuries, and humans looked no different from any other weak race that had dared to oppose them. "Begin the attack," Vashtar ordered in his clicking alien language. "Destroy the human vessels quickly. We have a schedule to keep." The first Vorthan energy beams lanced out toward the human fleet. But Steve's ships were already moving in ways that confused the alien gunners. Instead of maintaining formation like civilized military forces, the human vessels scattered in random directions, weaving through space like angry wasps. Lieutenant Nancy Williams piloted her fighter squadron directly into the heart of the Vorthan. Formation, her small ships moving so fast and unpredictably that the alien targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. "Fox Squadron, remember your training," she called to her pilots. "They can't hit what they can't predict." Her wingman, Captain Tony Garcia, flew his ship directly at a Vorthan cruiser, firing everything he had at the alien vessel's shield generators. The Vorthans expected him to pull away at the last second, but Tony had other plans. "Nancy, tell my wife I love her," he said calmly, then slammed his fighter directly into the enemy ship's bridge. The explosion tore through the Vorthan vessel, killing hundreds of aliens and sending debris flying in all directions. But Tony's sacrifice was just the beginning. All around the battlefield, human pilots were using their ships as weapons, turning every vessel into a potential missile. War Commander Vashtar watched in horror as his perfectly organized fleet began to fall apart. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Why are they destroying their own ships?" His tactical officer, a young Vorthan named Kethrin, studied the battle displays with growing fear. "Sir, they're using suicide attacks. They're ramming our ships with their own vessels." "Impossible," Vashtar snarled. "No civilized species would waste resources like that." "Sir, I don't think they care about resources," Kethrin replied quietly. "I think they just want to kill us." Commander Parker watched from his bridge as his fleet fought with a savagery that would have shocked even veteran soldiers. Engineer Danny Rodriguez had modified their weapons to overload on impact, turning every human ship into a bomb. Pilot Lisa Carter led a group of converted merchant vessels in coordinated ramming attacks that destroyed 3 Vorthan battleships in 10 minutes. "Parker to all ships," Steve commanded. "Execute Phoenix Protocol." Phoenix Protocol was the most dangerous tactic in the human playbook. Every remaining ship would overload their reactor cores simultaneously, creating a massive explosion that would destroy everything in a 50-kilometer radius. It was suicide, but it would take most of the Vorthan fleet with them. "Sir, are you sure about this?" asked his second-in-command, Lieutenant Karen Bell. "We came here to stop them," Steve replied. "This is how we stop them." One by one, the human ships began to glow as their reactors reached critical mass. The Vorthans realized what was happening and tried to retreat, but it was too late. The humans had positioned themselves throughout the alien formation, and there was nowhere to run. War Commander Vashtar's battleship was caught in the center of the explosion. As the blinding light consumed his vessel, he finally understood what his species had awakened. These humans weren't just warriors. They were something far more dangerous, a species that would rather die than lose, The battle lasted only 3 hours, but when it was over, the Vorthan fleet was destroyed. Of the 60 alien warships that had entered the system, only 12 managed to escape. The human fleet was completely annihilated, but their sacrifice had achieved something incredible. They had proven that the Vorthans could be beaten. News of the battle spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone had defeated a Vorthan fleet in open combat. The victory cost humanity dearly, but it sent a message that echoed across every inhabited world. Humans would not go quietly into the night. On Earth, Admiral Hayes received the battle report with mixed emotions. They had won, but at a terrible cost. Every ship was gone, every crew member was dead. But their sacrifice had bought humanity something precious: time and hope. "Send this message to all human colonies," Admiral Hayes ordered. "The Vorthans can be stopped." Today, 12 human ships destroyed 60 alien vessels. Today, we prove that courage can overcome any odds. The message reached every human settlement in the galaxy, and on each world, people looked up at the stars with new determination. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the destruction of New Haven Colony, humanity believed they could win. The Vorthans had expected to face a weak species that would crumble under pressure. Instead, they had found something that would haunt their nightmares: humans who fought not just to win, but to make sure their enemies paid the ultimate price for every victory. War Marshal Kethver stood in the command center of his massive flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds, watching as reports came in from across the galaxy. The defeat at Titan Station had sent shockwaves through the Vorthan Empire, and now every alien world was demanding answers. How had a handful of primitive human ships destroyed an entire Vorthan fleet? The War Marshal's reputation was in ruins, and his only chance at redemption was to crush humanity completely. "Assemble the entire Third Fleet," Kethver commanded his officers. "Every ship, every weapon, every warrior we have. We will show these humans what happens when they dare to challenge the Vorthan Empire." Within days, 300 Vorthan warships gathered at the edge of the Sol system. It was the largest fleet the aliens had ever assembled, carrying enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds. Kethver was certain that no force in the galaxy could stand against such overwhelming power. He was wrong. Admiral Robert Hayes stood in the command center on Mars, watching the massive alien fleet approach through long-range sensors. The old warrior had spent months preparing for this moment, turning the entire solar system into a death trap. Every asteroid had been mined, every satellite had been weaponized, and every human ship had been modified for one purpose: making the Vorthans pay for every meter of space they took. "All stations, this is Admiral Hayes," he spoke into the fleet. "Communication system. The enemy is coming with everything they have. They think they can overwhelm us with numbers. Today we teach them that humans don't need numbers to win. We just need to be more determined than they are." Captain Lucy Martin commanded a squadron of converted asteroid miners, massive industrial ships that had been turned into weapons of war. Her crews were made up of miners, engineers, and dock workers who had volunteered to fight, despite having no military training. They knew they were going to die, but they were determined to take as many aliens with them as possible. "Remember what we practiced," Lucy told her pilots over the radio. "Wait until they get close, then ram them at full speed. Our ships are built to crack asteroids. Their hulls won't even slow us down." The first wave of Vorthan ships entered the outer solar system, confident that they could sweep aside any human resistance. They were met by a nightmare that would haunt Vorthan military doctrine for generations. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, inside debris fields, and from directions that should have been impossible. They fought with a savagery that shocked even veteran alien warriors. Commander Greg Sullivan led a fighter squadron in a direct assault on the Vorthan flagship. His pilots flew their small ships through enemy fire that should have destroyed them, but they kept coming like angry hornets. When his fighter was finally hit by alien weapons, Greg pointed his crippled ship at the nearest enemy vessel and activated his engine overload. "For New Haven Colony," he shouted as his ship exploded against the alien hull. Tearing a massive hole in their defenses, the battle for Mars became a slaughter, but not the kind the Vorthons had expected. For every human ship they destroyed, the aliens lost 2 of their own. The humans fought with tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare, using their own ships as missiles and their own lives as weapons. Dr. Helen Brooks watched the battle from her laboratory deep beneath the Martian surface, where she was making final preparations for humanity's secret weapon. The quantum disruption warheads she had developed were designed to exploit a weakness in Vorthon shield technology, but they had never been tested in actual combat. "Are you sure this will work?" asked her assistant, Dr. Carol Davis, as they watched. "The weapon systems come online?" "It has to work," Helen replied. "If it doesn't, we're all dead anyway." The warheads were launched from hidden positions throughout the solar system, invisible to Vorthon sensors until it was too late. When they detonated, they created quantum fields that tore through alien shields like paper, leaving the enemy ships defenseless against human weapons. Engineer Ryan Cooper worked frantically in the control room of the Orbital Defense Network, coordinating the attacks of thousands of weaponized satellites. Each satellite was small and weak on its own, but together they created a web of destruction that no enemy could escape. "Target their command ships first," Ryan ordered his team. "Cut off their heads and the rest will fall." War Marshal Kethver watched in horror as his mighty fleet was torn apart by enemies that should have been helpless. His perfectly trained warriors were being outfought by miners and merchants who had learned to fight in the last few weeks. His advanced warships were being destroyed by primitive weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their defenses. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "They're just humans. They're supposed to be weak." "Sir, I don't think they're weak," the officer replied, his voice shaking with fear. "I think they're insane." The truth was worse than insanity. The humans weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for the right to exist. And there was no force in the galaxy more dangerous than a species that refused to accept defeat. Every human ship that was destroyed took multiple alien vessels with it. Every human life that was lost was traded for 10 alien lives. By the end of the day, the mighty Vorthon fleet was broken. Of the 300 ships that had entered the Sol system, less than 50 managed to escape. The rest were destroyed by an enemy that fought with a determination that terrified even the most hardened alien warriors. Admiral Hayes stood among the ruins of his fleet, looking out at the debris field that had once been the pride of 2 civilizations. The cost had been enormous, but they had won. More importantly, they had sent a message that would echo throughout the galaxy. Humanity would not be conquered. "Send this message to every world in the galaxy," Admiral Hayes ordered. "Tell them that the Vorthon Empire is not invincible. Tell them that humans have proven that courage can overcome any odds. Tell them that the galaxy has a new power, and we will not be ignored." The message spread across the stars, reaching species that had cowered under Vorthon rule for centuries. For the first time, they began to believe that freedom might be possible. The humans had done the impossible. They had defeated the galaxy's most feared empire twice. Now the question was whether they could do it a third time. The Galactic Union Council met in emergency session on the neutral world of Zentara, their massive chamber filled with representatives from 100 different species. For the first time in 3 centuries, they were discussing the possibility that the Vorthon Empire might actually lose a war. The thought terrified them almost as much as it excited them. Council Speaker Zephyrin, a tall insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes, called for order as reports came in from across the galaxy. "The humans have now defeated 2 major Vorthon fleets," he announced to the assembled delegates. "Our intelligence suggests that the Vorthon Empire has lost over 400 warships in less than a month." A murmur of disbelief ran through the chamber. The Krillian ambassador, a being that looked like a walking crystal, spoke up. "How is this possible? The humans had no military strength when they joined the Union 50 years ago." "They didn't need military strength," replied the Nexaran delegate, her blue skin glowing with nervous energy. "They had something more dangerous, the willingness to sacrifice everything for victory." Meanwhile, War Marshal Kethver stood in the ruins of his command center aboard the crippled destroyer of worlds. His once mighty flagship was barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and the determination of his surviving crew. Around him, the remnants of the Fourth and Third Fleet limped toward their homeworlds, defeated and demoralized. "War Marshal," said his communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Kethver's 4 eyes blazed with hatred. "Put it through." The holographic display activated, showing Captain Jake Morrison standing on the bridge of Aurora's Dream. The human looked tired but determined, his uniform torn and stained with the blood of battle. Behind him stood his crew, Lisa Carter, Danny Rodriguez, and Amy Walsh, all of them bearing the scars of their impossible war. "War Marshal Kethver," Jake said quietly. "I'm Captain Morrison of the Human Defense Force. I have a message for you." "Speak, human," Kethver snarled. "Before I finish what I started at your pathetic colony," Jake's expression didn't change. "You came to our home to destroy us. You murdered 50,000 innocent people to make a point. You thought you could break our spirit with fear and violence." "I will break your spirit," Kethver replied. "I will hunt down every human in the galaxy and make them pay for defying me." "No," Jake said simply. "You won't." The transmission cut to static, and moments later, Kethver's sensors detected multiple human ships approaching. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, but the War Marshal had learned to fear human tactics. These weren't just warriors coming to fight. They were predators coming to finish what they had started. Admiral Hayes commanded the human fleet from his flagship, the newly built battleship Vengeance. The ship was a testament to human engineering, built not for elegance or efficiency, but for one purpose: destroying enemies. Every system, every weapon, every piece of armor was designed to make the Vorthans pay for their crimes. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he spoke into the fleet communications. "Today we end this war. Today we show the galaxy that humans don't just fight for survival, we fight for justice." The final battle was brief but decisive. The human ships moved with the precision of a surgical strike, targeting the Vorthan command. Vessels and communication systems. They had learned from their previous encounters, adapting their tactics to exploit every weakness in alien defenses. Captain Morrison led a boarding party onto the Destroyer of Worlds, fighting their way through corridors filled with desperate alien warriors. Lisa Carter covered his advance with deadly accurate shooting, while Danny Rodriguez used his engineering skills to disable the ship's defensive systems. Amy Walsh coordinated the attack by jamming Vorthan communications. War Marshal Kethver made his last stand in his command center, surrounded by his most loyal officers. When Morrison and his team finally reached him, the alien leader was wounded but still defiant. "You cannot win," Kethver gasped, his alien blood pooling beneath him. "There are thousands of Vorthan worlds, millions of warriors. You are just one small species." Morrison knelt beside the dying War Marshal, his voice cold as space. "You're right. We are just one small species, but we're the species that refuses to lose." He drew his sidearm and placed it against Kethver's head. "This is for New Haven Colony." The shot echoed through the ship, and with it, the Vorthan threat to humanity died. Within hours, news of the War Marshal's death spread throughout the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire, already weakened by their losses, began to collapse as subject species rose in rebellion. The humans had done more than win a war. They had liberated half the galaxy. President Santos stood before the cameras once again, this time addressing not just humanity, but every species in known space. "The war is over," she announced. "The Vorthan Empire is defeated. But this victory belongs to more than just humanity. It belongs to everyone who believes that freedom is worth fighting for." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "We offer our hand in friendship to all species who seek peace. But to those who would threaten innocent people, who would use fear and violence to control others, we have a different message." Her voice became hard as steel. "We are humans. We tried peace and you rejected it. We tried diplomacy and you answered with murder. So we chose war and we won. Remember that lesson because we will not forget it. Admiral Hayes stood on the Bridge of Vengeance, looking out at the stars that humanity had claimed through blood and sacrifice. The galaxy was different now. Where once there had been fear of the Vorthons, now there was respect for humans. They had proven that courage could overcome any odds, that determination could defeat any enemy. The human fleet began its journey home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had changed the course of galactic history. They had started as a small, peaceful species that just wanted to trade and explore. They had been forced to become something else, the galaxy's new guardians, the species that would stand against tyranny wherever it arose. The galaxy had shaken in fear when humanity declared war. Now it trembled with hope, knowing that somewhere among the stars, humans stood ready to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. The age of Vorthon domination was over. The age of human protection had begun.